Favorite energy type? Since the very beginning of D&D, it's been associated with the four classical Greek elements of fire, water, air, and earth. Maybe not necessarily in that order. Should be earth, fire, wind, water, and the ethereal. No. And early on, these four elements became associated with four energy types. I don't know how explicit, I don't remember how explicit it was in the early D&D, but I know for sure in 3rd edition it was very explicit that fire was fire, that's obvious. Air was lightning, water was cold, and earth was acid. Fire gets a free pass because fire is fire. Air being lightning makes some sense, but lightning also sets fire to things. If you read the description of the lightning bolt, it sets fire to things. So why is air so closely allied with fire? And should air really be the element of electricity if lightning can go both from the air to the ground, but more likely from the ground up? So why isn't earth associated with electricity? Because that's too scientific and not classical enough. But how did Earth end up with acid? I think they just had a very clear idea that we know we got fire damage, we know you can freeze stuff with cold damage, we know you can shock things with electric damage, and you can totally dissolve things in acid. But there's no element for acid, so we'll associate acid with Earth. Now, there are ways that you can come about this when you deal with like sulfuric acid and other forms of organic acids. They do come from organic, or you can also have metallic acids as well, but they are coming from, earthen material. So I suppose you could get to it from there. Their 3rd edition also more heavily codified other energy types, such as sonic energy, force energy, positive energy, and negative energy. These have always existed. But they were more explicitly codified in 3rd edition than they were in earlier editions. I mean, 1st edition had a shout spell and a shatter spell, and it had magic missile dealing magic damage, although I don't think back then, I think they might have even said it was, bolts of magical force, but not explicitly force damage. Of course, there were positive energy healing spells, the cure line and there were negative energy harming spells such as the inflict line. So these have existed throughout D&D's history. When it comes to picking an element that is my favorite, now it says energy type, but of the energy types in D&D, they're associated most strongly with the 4 elemental types. I actually don't look to D&D for the answer to that. As a DM, I think my favorite is probably fire, because it's very evocative. Players immediately know what's up. They get the picture real quick. It allows you to add instant drama because you just light the place on fire, and there you go. It takes one spell. I've seen some people, newer DMs in particular, be very surprised by the massive impact the fireball and lightning bolt spells have on games. And I'll speak more towards the fireball spell here, but lightning bolt does the same thing because, as I mentioned, it sets things on fire. The DMs will suddenly, lower level creatures, a lot of creatures with lower hit points aren't going to do anything to a party because they can blow them up. In 3rd edition on, a fireball spell is just like a 20-foot radius or a 30-foot radius, and that's it. You just pick a point and then you draw a radius around it. Maybe you block off some stuff for walls, but it doesn't go any further than that. That's not how it was back in 1st edition. In 1st edition, keep in mind this was a game written by nerds for nerds. You had to calculate the volume of a 30-foot radius or 20-foot radius sphere. I'm sad that I can't remember if it's 20 or 30 feet. I think it's 30 feet. Let's say 30. You had to calculate the volume of a 30-foot radius sphere, and then realize that if you launched a fireball in a room smaller than that, the fireball will expand until it fills its full volume. So that means it's going to shoot down corridors and into other rooms until it maxes out that full volume of fire. I enjoy that. Apparently other people don't, because that's one of the first things they jettisoned in 3rd edition when they rewrote the rules. But I enjoy that. Another rule that people forget with fire is that it sets things on fire. everyone's fine standing in a dungeon and fireballing a creature, or, well, usually a group of creatures. And then this actually happened. After the fight, going and searching the desk and finding some notes that are crucial to the plot. The adventure path that we are playing through on our Friday game, this happened. We shot... it wasn't actually us shooting the fireball. Oh no, this wasn't the Friday game. This was the Sunday game. It was an enemy shot a fireball into the room where we are, and we had to find some information on a dead body that was in that room and got hit by 2 fireballs. But fortunately, the paperwork still survived, even though it really shouldn't have. So keep that in mind if you have players that have made it to 5th level and they want to start using these big blasty spells. Keep in mind they set things on fire. You're in a wooden building, you have a chance of setting the building on fire. There's papers or scrolls or magic cloak in the room, you have a chance of setting it on fire. So it'll force the players to be more discreet and more thoughtful with their use of magic. But enemies don't care, because dead enemies don't keep treasure. Probably my least favorite element is lightning. There's plenty of good lightning spells, and I can totally see creating a lightning-based sorcerer, for example, who has Shocking Grasp, and they used to have like the orb spells from 3rd edition that would deal elemental damage and have an extra effect on them. And then Lightning Bolt, or maybe like a druid with Call Lightning. There's a lot of fun things there. In fact, one of my favorite things to do when I first read the druid class as a kid was you had a spell that allowed you to summon a storm, and then you had a spell that let you call down lightning. Now, I grew up in a desert, so the ability to summon a rainstorm at will was pretty dang awesome as far as I was concerned. And then being able to call down lightning bolts on your enemies afterwards, that was just icing on the cake. Acid is probably my second least favorite, only because most of the acid spells that exist already are pretty weak. Or if they're not weak, Melf's Acid Arrow, or just Acid Arrow, if you're looking at the SRD or Pathfinder, deals a good amount of damage, but it does so over time, and damage over time is not necessarily as good as burst damage. Because if you're waiting, 2 and 3 rounds for the damage to kill the enemy, that's 2 and 3 rounds the enemy has another action to attack you. Whereas if you just burst him down in the first round, then he doesn't get to fight back. But it is really good for certain applications. For example, hitting a spellcaster where they have to make a concentration check against the ongoing acid damage if they want to cast a spell. That's a good use of it. And one of my brother and I've mentioned this before, we used to make up adventuring parties all the time. One of my adventuring parties that I put a lot of time into had a wizard who specialized in acid spells. He was actually from an area of the world that was sulfur flats. And so he lived in this barren landscape where there was these pockets of sulfur gas that would leak up from under the ground. And you couldn't live where the sulfur gas was, but you could live, nearby, up on a mesa or a plateau or something. And he specialized in acid damage, partly because I wanted to explore the idea of using... there's a metamagic feat called energy substitution, and it lets you switch out one energy type for another. So he would use Fireball to cast Acid Ball, or he would use Lightning Bolt to cast Acid Bolt, things like that. Cone of Cold became Cone of Acid. It's a quick find replace. One of my favorite elements, though, from the player side is I like playing water types. Now, in D&D, there's not so much water as an elemental type. It's cold, so dealing with cold damage. Monty Cook released a game called Arcana Evolve. Now, if you ever wondered where the idea of picking a bunch of abilities off of a list for like every class that Pathfinder has, that pretty much saw a huge bump from Arcana Evolved. In the original 3rd edition, you had the fighters choosing their feats. There were some of those rogue abilities when you hit high level. But for the most part, your class just kind of dictated abilities to you. In Arcana Evolved, the classes all had choices to make. And one of the classes they had is a witch. and witches learned witcheries. And depending on which type of witch you were, you had different, depending on which witch, you had different lists of witcheries to choose from. And one of my favorite characters when I played Arcana Evolved was a Quickling, which is like a... Quicklings were kind of like halfling creatures, kind of. Arcana Evolved was an alternate player's handbook. It had its own classes, its own races, its own spells. And essentially you just removed the player's handbook from 3rd edition and put Arcana Evolved in its place, and then you could play the game. Quicklings, if you could go through a ritual, and I think you spent a feat on it, and then you turned into... no, they had a different name, and then you turned into a Quickling. Anyway, you became a little winged fairy creature. But my little winged fairy creature was a winter witch, and he froze people. And like one of the witcheries, you could freeze someone's scabbard shut so they couldn't draw their weapon. Or you could freeze their feet to the ground so they can't move. Things like that. And I love playing Ice Mage type characters because Ice has a lot more manipulative ability. Ice has a lot more creative use options. When you have fire... When you have electricity, when you have acid, there's not much you can do with those. But when you have ice, you can build stuff with ice. You can shape stuff from ice. And you can put your imagination to the test with all the different things you can do with ice. Kind of following up on that, there's Legend of the Five Rings. So if you had the 3rd edition book, Oriental Adventures... or if you've ever played Legend of the Five Rings itself, it's a wonderful, flavorful, incredibly living campaign setting. It's tied to a collectible card game, and based on who wins the tournaments in that card game, they get to make changes in the storyline. Or, well, they get to make choices for the storyline going forward. So there's been plenty of things that have happened in the campaign world as they've published all their books that I really don't like, but I know exactly why they happened. In Legend of the Five Rings, you also follow a sort of 4-element model of fire, earth, air, and water. And each of the different clans has their own school, and their schools are associated with a certain element. The one exception to that is my favorite clan, the Phoenix clan. They are the spellcasters in Rokugan, which is the name of the empire there. And so their school actually teaches all 4 elements. You just pick one. And so I've enjoyed playing... I've actually never played the real Legend of the Five Rings role-playing game, but I have played D&D 3rd edition using Oriental Adventures to play Legend of the Five Rings. And I'm in love with a lot of the water spells. Second place is probably the earth spells. Isawa Tadaka, who was a main character in the storyline of Rokugan when I first started reading about it, was actually the elemental master of earth. And I have his playing card from L5R, and it is awesome looking. And so that's my main inspiration for earth casters. And I like earthbenders in Avatar, but I think water's my favorite. I like the waterbenders the best. And mostly because, as I mentioned before, it has the most manipulability. Earth would probably be the second most. See, air and fire are way too ethereal. There's nothing there. There's no substance to them. I mean, yeah, sure, air actually has substance because it's air. Fire is just a light manifestation of energy transfer from heat and combustion, but earth and water are more physical things that you can actually do something with, and so I like the ability to manipulate them. And of the two, water can take many more forms than earth. Earth tends to be too chunky, not malleable, particularly when you're dealing with stone, whereas water is perfectly malleable, and then you can freeze it, and then it stays solid, kind of like a rock. So I think water is my favorite element, and probably cold is my favorite energy type. Wow, that was a long one. I was hoping that would actually be a short one. Tomorrow, my gosh, favorite magic item, that's probably going to be a long one. Until next time, bye-bye.